No, speak, you're gonna do this here. You're gonna hit this. September 12th at 5:34. Would everyone please make sure that you have checked in for roll call? And when that is done, Member Hill is going to be about 15 minutes late. All right, moving on to meeting practices and information. Before we begin tonight, I would like to remind everyone that the board appreciates and supports stakeholder input at our meetings. However, it is important to note that the board meeting is not a meeting of the public, but it is a meeting to conduct the district's business in public. Everyone should have a chance to express their opinions respectfully within the guidelines the board has established for its meeting so that the board is able to conduct the meeting effectively and efficiently. During the meeting, there will be time for public comment on our agenda item. As of January of 2025, public comment will only be conducted in person. If you wish to speak tonight, please submit a written speaker card with the executive assistant. Members of the public may observe the meeting via NUSD YouTube channel or in person at Newark City Council chambers. Spanish translation is available if necessary. Pledge of Allegiance, please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, which is the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Mike seems extra loud tonight. All right, we move into public comment on the study session agenda. Ms. Parks.
I'm sorry, member.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I think you need to adopt the agenda.
Oh,
And
you know
that
what?
piece is actually missing on here. And
We do.
so I actually need you to make a motion to be able to add the item, to be able to adopt the agenda.
Okay. Need to make a motion to be able to adopt the agenda. If we could have a motion and then we'll do a vote.
I make a motion to adopt the agenda.
Thank you. And a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Member Aguiano motions. Member Block seconds. Okay. And a vote for that, please. Okay. All right. Member Hill, if you will check in the next vote you can participate in.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry. All right. So motion carries with 4 ayes and Member Hill just checking in. Okay. All right. Ms. Parks.
Good evening on this lovely Friday night. Make this quick, the Dodgers are playing the Giants. Good evening. Tonight, I'd like to first acknowledge and support the board's decision to form a 7-Eleven committee. This advisory group plays a crucial role in reviewing district-owned properties and recommending which may be considered surplus. It's clear that the intent is to explore how best to manage underutilized or vacant properties, whether through leasing, potential sale, or other strategic use, while maintaining public transparency and community involvement. However, I want to express a concern. The presentation attached to this evening's agenda is the same one from the June 9th meeting, which focuses heavily on school consolidation, a topic that, as noted by several board members over the last 3 months, has not been formally discussed or agreed upon by the board. It was made clear at this point School consolidation is not under consideration, and that such language can create unnecessary fear and division within the community. I respectfully urge the district to align all communications and presentations with the board's actual direction and current scope. The focus, as several board members have rightly stated, is an assessment management plan which extends beyond just school sites. This distinction matters greatly for public understanding and trust. Community members deserve clarity on which properties are being considered and how recommendations will be made. Televising these types of sessions is a great step forward in ensuring transparency. Lastly, I appreciate the caution previously expressed around the timing. They need to have a full-time permanent CBO in place before the committee becomes active. Given the financial complexity and overlap with the Measure O, this makes sense and will help ensure the community's work is both strategic and actionable. Thank you.
Mr. New.
Good evening. Hey, that's so far away. Can you hear me? Oh, okay. So I can talk as long as I want because there's no timer?
Wait until you started.
Okay, well, I will be quick. If you ask any concerned citizen what is going to be discussed tonight here, they will say, it's the 7-Eleven committee, right? And then if you look at the agenda item, it says 7-Eleven committee. But then you go into this description, and then school consolidation pops up in the middle somewhere. And I don't think that's a good way of doing things. As you know, when it comes to closing schools, that's a very political and emotional issue that needs to be properly communicated, not be put inside a 7-Eleven agenda item. They have nothing to do with each other. I mean, one could cause a change for the other, but the 7-Eleven committee is a non-political committee that basically makes findings and recommendations, while a school consolidation is as political as you can get, right? So that's my concern, that we don't properly communicate to the community that school consolidation is on the agenda and potentially discussed here. I understand that there's a law firm that's going to give a presentation, and also there I would put a little bit of a question mark, because while it's not illegal, a law firm that handles, that helps with 7-Eleven processes and at the same time is involved with consolidation, that could create a potential or, perceived conflict of interest. Yeah. So these are the two things I wanted to bring up. Then the last little thing is about the bylaws, the proposed bylaws. My understanding is that the 7-Eleven committee is a committee created by the board. And as such, the board should have the authority of removing members for cause. The bylaw actually does state that, but it also states that the superintendent has that authority. And, I would suggest to, no slight intention, I think you would do a great job to do that, but it's just something that belongs to the board to make those kind of decisions. That's it. I have 9 seconds left, so I'm good. Have a good night. Thank you.
Those were the only 2 public comments, correct? All right, so I will open it up to you all to start the discussion.
Good evening, board members. Thank you for coming out this evening on a Friday evening. This evening's conversation is around the 7-Eleven committee. The backup documentations were the same documentations that you saw Prior, they're on there really more as background, and also for us to be able to get direction from all of you as to what the board's pleasure is as far as forming a committee. Also, there had been some discussion which honestly left staff without full clarity as to whether or not you also want to move forward with any kind of like an optimization type committee that would be looking at all of our properties for the betterment of educational purposes. And so that would help us also to know whether or not you need to run like parallel committees to go along with that. If that discussion would be very helpful to staff to make sure that we can help and support you and the community with information. I think the speaker this evening, I raised a good point. The superintendent most certainly does not want to be selecting your members and being the police over members that come forward. I would much rather that be the Board of Education, quite frankly. So on that note, I do agree with that. And again, you may want to hold off. Maybe now's not the right timing. Those discussions and decisions are all yours to make this evening, and to be able to help and provide support to staff so that we can assist you in helping to move discussions forward as to what we're doing with our properties that we currently have, and then also any future goals that the board might have that you would want to hear from the community on to be able to support the educational outcomes of this district that there have been many conversations on already in the past for some of the goals, especially around academic success. With that, we have here this evening with us our attorney who's been selected by the board and with the ad hoc committee to talk about the process of property here in our district. And so it's my pleasure to introduce Sabrina Abram to you this evening. She's with the law firm of,
Orbach, Huffin, Henderson.
thank you. I know them as OHH. I know their acronym. So she's here too this evening to be able to give you a brief presentation and then to open up for the discussion with the board members on this.
Thank you, Superintendent Backer. Thank you, board members, for having me back to continue this very important discussion. And just to provide some background and again, some context for the information that was provided with the agenda, the conversation about asset management with the board and presentations to the board started back in June, as you all know, on June 9th. And at that time, materials were presented to the board taking, as many districts are dealing with issues similar to your district around how best to potentially optimize their assets, whether that's driven through an educational goal and with the intention to have educational outcomes be the priority for that, and how to move through a process that gets you from point A to point Z, including what are the legal parameters and options for the district to weigh and be aware of as you're determining the next steps around that. One of the things that I wanted to highlight is that with the prior presentation that was given, the goal was to present on the asset management planning, both the 7-11 committee formation, what of course the board's role would be, which is approving a resolution, approving bylaws, and informing those documents, which is why they were provided in draft so that there could be robust conversations around how to potentially form those for this district. And then moving on from there to what are the allowable options for the district under the education code, both under the surplus statutes and alternatives to surplus. And we covered that information in some detail. I did want to point out that there has been recent changes under AB 130 that was enacted at the tail end of July. And what that does is it does alter a little bit the compliance requirements of the school district. What we covered back in June, just to refresh the board's recollection on it, is that when district property is deemed surplus after a 7-11 committee process, there are certain steps that are required under the K-12 statutes that the district has to take. The district has a very robust surplus process that it has to comply with. And typically when the district is moving to take the next steps on property that's been deemed surplus after a 7-Eleven committee has made a recommendation, that entire process is exempted from what we call the Surplus Land Act, which is surplusing requirements that governmental agencies are typically required to follow. But because school districts have their own robust statutes, 7-Eleven committee processes and exchange transactions are typically exempted from the Surplus Land Act. What this recent law does is it removes those exemptions. So both exchange properties as well as properties considered and recommendations made by 7-Eleven committees that then the board potentially could deem surplus are now subject to the Surplus Land Act requirements as well. And I'm happy to provide more detail about that as we move further in the process, but I did want to highlight that for the board as a change for you all to consider and be aware of. And with that, I did want to open the floor to questions around next steps with the goal of developing a plan for educational optimization and how best to accomplish that with the district's asset management planning in mind. So I will turn it back to the board president for comments and questions.
Okay, Member Block?
Thank you. So just to make this more concrete, then I'm just trying to like think out loud and make sure we're all on the same page. So when it comes to properties that might be discussed by a 7-Eleven committee, that would presumably be snow and music. And am I missing anything else? Or are those the primary two? Just so I'm like, I have a mental picture of like what's the parameters of the discussion today.
Well, I think that was one of the things the board needs to do before we form the 7-Eleven committee is to explain and determine the breadth of what they're supposed to look into. So certainly I think snow and music are part of that, but I think Whiteford is also part of it. And I think what's known as Sam Scott Field, which is the area adjacent to Newark Boulevard and the middle school, is also property that is not being utilized by or needed by the middle school and could be looked at. So I would like to think that at least those 4 properties are considered as part of the scope of the 7-Eleven committee's recommendations. But I'm open to hearing what other board
questions?
members say.
Oh, Member Hill.
Yes, so just echoing what the comments in public comment. So I am a little bit disappointed because we had a long discussion about this a couple months ago, and I think we talked about the fact that what we had originally talked about going in was that we wanted to really have a look at our entire portfolio and look at existing uses for everything and then potential uses with maybe some scope that the board articulates around, what the end goal would be. And that we felt that this was a very kind of narrow focus. But it doesn't seem like any of that discussion was reflected in the information tonight, right? And so that's why I think that we're still confused. But my sense is that I think that basically just taking things piecemeal versus looking at the entire portfolio could be very dangerous and could end up in sub-optimization. So I think that we need to look at everything and look at what are we using everything for and what potentially are the needs and what could they be used for in the future. I think that that's probably a better first step. That's my comment. Thank you.
May I ask you a follow-up question? on that. So I don't know that I disagree with you. As a matter of fact, I do remember those comments. And I think that's where, I think one of the things that we talked about is that become part of the 7-Eleven process, or does it become part of a separate committee that's under the superintendent or underneath the facilitator to be able to have that broader conversation around all of our properties? And I think that's kind of like where I'm at with trying to understand and like going back and from the comments that were made, I still think that the first, I think at our last meeting, I mean, I felt like there still wasn't enough clarity for me as far as like what process we're going with. And if we're not going with the 7-Eleven process right now, and we're going to move into looking at something with all of our properties for consideration as to what's out there and what's the best uses for them, then I just need more clarity as to what kind of committee that is.
So I guess my confusion is that I don't understand why we can't use the 7-Eleven committee as the umbrella to do that analysis. I don't know why we can't have a starting point, which essentially says, okay, first we're going to look at all the properties. And then we're going to talk about here's what they're used for, here's what maybe they're not used for, here's what they could be used for. And then that would then lead into then some more specific concrete next steps. But I don't see it as a separate committee. I see it as the first phase of a 7-Eleven committee.
I guess so my question would then be, does it have to be two separate committees if we're looking at everything and, you know, taking into consideration, like Member Hill has said, all the use, what as we look forward 5 to 10 years, what's going to be the best use of all the facilities, and determining if we, you know, don't want to come up with another creative solution to how to possibly consolidate or shift things around so that we are best utilizing the facilities that are honestly in the best condition. So I do remember us kind of talking about both tracks, and we didn't really, I don't believe we kind of really formalized, well, we want it to be the same track. We want everything to be, you know, put out there at the same time, looking at the surplus as well as the use of all the facilities and what we might do. So I understand why you were confused, because I think we were kind of confused also on what we could or couldn't do. So that's my question is, what can we do within the umbrella of the 7-Eleven? And do we have to separate them?
So the short answer is no, you don't have to separate them. You can do it the way that Board Member Hill described. I think what's unique about the process that you're suggesting, and it's a good one, is that there is this working group element or goal, because what you're going to be studying is also optimization of your educational programs.
Right.
And how you can maybe coordinate that with your real estate asset management planning as well. So that part of it, you may want to have a committee that has a little more expertise around that issue in particular. Mm-hmm. And with an ad hoc or superintendent's advisory committee, you have a little more flexibility on who you can choose to be on a committee that would be doing that initial assessment. Because I think you all remember, and it's in the materials, that for a 7-Eleven committee, it's a statutorily required representative group. And that group may not necessarily be the best to be advising the board on the educational optimization component. And I think because there is a working session or lots of maybe working sessions that will be required in order for that piece to be sorted through, having a little more of a flexible environment to do that in, as opposed to a Brown Act committee. And as you all know, those Brown Act committees have more stringent rules and requirements for how the meetings are conducted, could give the district a little more flexibility. So those would be the reasons if you wanted to separate it, but you could do it under the 7-Eleven committee umbrella.
Well, to me, it does make sense to have the educational part of it looked at by a group that really understands, you know, and is involved in creating the educational programs for the students. So it makes sense that that's an educated group, so to speak. Member Hill.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, my sense is that this is, this is potentially one of the most strategic projects that we can do. And I think it's super important for us to have transparency. And so I really think that's one of the reasons why we want to use the 7-Eleven committee. We want to have a Brown Act, have it be a Brown Act committee, so there's full transparency. And as I look at your draft resolution and you talk about the potential roles which are specified by the regulations, I think that potentially that this can fall into it. I mean, you can have teachers on it, you can have an administrator on it, right? And also I think it's important to understand that even though those are the representatives, that doesn't mean that there aren't other members of the public or members of the administration that are coming in and sharing information. And also, I would suspect that this group can maybe request that certain information be prepared. And so if they, if they say, well, we want to understand, what's being done, for example, at McGregor, and from an educational perspective, and is that like sort of the only place that it could be, right? And then an analysis could be prepared, for that discussion. But I think it's really important that it be open and transparent, and and I think that we can get the right input on this, right? I don't. So that's just my 2 cents.
And I did want to point out, and we may have touched on this at the last meetings, but you can have community at large members after you meet the requisite membership that has to be represented on the committee. There are additional membership roles that can be filled by the community at large at the board's direction and selection.
Yeah, I was going to ask, would it work if we, if we did say we did have the educational grouping, and that there were, members at large in the community that were also part of that committee, but it would be less strict in terms of Brown Act. So,
Is the question about the ad hoc committee representation or the 7-Eleven committee?
I guess it was, I guess what I was saying was it's the ad hoc committee of the kind of overseeing the educational. It would allow for a greater group, I think, but which could vary, which would include. I would prefer it would include community as well as district, but maybe not so strict as a Brown Act committee. So an ad hoc that was larger. But if the 7-Eleven kind of, you can do that for that in that setting, then, or that kind of a committee, then that could also work. I just think it's good to have enough people that really understand the educational programs that are working to come up with, ideas and plans.
And I did want to address the transparency comment because that's an important one for Brown Act committees. That is a primary goal and reason why a lot of times districts opt to form a Brown Act committee for not only the asset management planning, they sometimes will do it even when discussing consolidation, even though that's not necessarily required for a consolidation process. But to address transparency with an ad hoc committee or a superintendent's advisory committee that doesn't have to have its meetings and have them open to the public there is the option. I just want to put it out there so that it doesn't, I don't want the community to misunderstand that ad hoc means it's not transparent.
Right.
There is reporting back that occurs, at least when I'm advising ad hoc committees. There is regular reporting that occurs at board meetings. And also, there is maybe a more abridged meeting minute type of procedure for publishing those minutes in a way that the community can follow along with what's being presented to the ad hoc committee and the steps they're taking. So the goal isn't for it to not be transparent.
Right.
There would still be transparency. It's just not being conducted openly and pursuant to the Brown Act the way like this meeting would occur, for example.
Yeah, and I don't have a problem with the transparency. That wasn't what I was kind of meaning. It was more that I want to if we're going to do that, I want it to have the people on the committee, or at least a group of people on the committee that definitely understand the educational program piece of it.
Something I heard last time
I see.
that I was just thinking about, in this conversation, kind of like came back to me. There was a real desire to make sure that if we're talking about a school community someplace, that their input is taken into effect. I heard that said by multiple board members last time. And so sometimes when you have the 7-Eleven committee, it can be, it may not include all those other, they may not have a representation from, I'll just throw out the school, for example, from Lincoln, right? And so although there's good intention from those members that are there, sometimes they just want to be able to have their voice also heard at their particular sites. And I think an ad hoc committee sometimes also allows for that. Of course, I think you can do that at any time. I mean, you can always direct the superintendent or staff members to be able to go out and make sure that, you know, they're getting input and gathering information, whether it's through surveys or, you know, meeting with that school community. But I think it's just kind of a nice gesture to make sure that there's that open dialogue that actually can still occur amongst all of our schools. Where they may not have direct representation on the actual 7-Eleven committee.
Right. Nancy, or Member Thomas?
Yeah, I'd like some clarification about the 7-Eleven committee. To my understanding, is no fewer than 7 and no more than 11 committees. So it's a specific committee that's made up of specific individuals. Whereas when we had the school consolidation committee, what happened with that committee is they made recommendations to the board. Then the 7-Eleven committee is subsequently charged with determining if they do consolidate schools, that any surplus schools are looked at by a 7-Eleven committee. So it seems to me that the precursor to the 7-Eleven committee, if we want to look at our programs and our facilities, you know, educationally, and whether we should be consolidating them or moving things around, it seems that that should be a precursor committee to the 7-Eleven committee, and that if it's a board-formed committee, isn't that also a Brown Act committee? Instead of being a superintendent-formed committee as an advisory committee, that would be a board-formed committee that would meet the requirements of the Brown Act. Is that true?
You can have a Brown Act I'm using consolidation as the analogy because you used it, but a Brown Act consolidation committee, for example. Yes, you can. Even though it's not called a 7-Eleven committee, it's a separate committee that's being formed by the board, and the board is requiring that their business be done openly and pursuant to the Brown Act. So similar to the resolution that we have for the 7-Eleven committee, the board can say, okay, here are the representative groups that should sit on the committee, and then can go through a similar process of approving bylaws and receiving applications and appointing members.
So that would allow us to really expand the committee beyond 11 if we need to, or not have to meet the specific requirements of a 7-Eleven committee for the type of people that need to be on it. And it would be, it seems to me, a better starting place for looking at school consolidations, because out of that is going to come additional surplus property. Face it, the consolidation means we're going to be removing other properties that really should be looked at at the same time that the properties I mentioned earlier, which are already closed or vacant or surplus. So that means, you know, we would really want to expand the scope of the 7-Eleven committee based on the outcome of a board-formed committee to look at consolidation.
And I will say, just based on a lot of recent experience and what many districts, how they've structured some of their committees, we are seeing that if a district has, for example, a consolidation committee and also has an asset management committee that's conducting business at the same time, oftentimes the asset management committee is wanting to know what is the consolidation committee's recommendation, so then that can inform the asset management committee's work as to next steps. And so in some cases, there's a pause on the formed asset management committees while the consolidation committee does their work and makes their recommendation, and then it becomes under the purview of the Asset Management Committee to take the next steps relating to the properties that are being recommended for.
So you're saying they can be in tandem, but that the Asset Management Committee doesn't want to get out in front of the Consolidation Committee?
Correct.
Okay, Member Aguano.
Ms. Abraham, since the June 9th presentation that we had, the forming of the committee, 7-Eleven committee, the forming of it, how far after do you have to form a different group if it happens to go?
Meaning the time.
Meaning like the educational group, or if not, the board form group? How far after do you have to, is there a limitation to that?
Is the question the timeline for forming a committee?
Yes.
Or,
After if you gather the 7-Eleven committee, once you have that established?
so once the board approves a resolution to form a 7-Eleven committee, just to go through what the steps would be for
Correct.
that committee to start doing their work?
Right.
So the board would approve, the way it typically works is the board would approve a resolution and approve the attached recommended bylaws. Again, you were provided a resolution and bylaws in draft to get your feedback, and those can be amended to reflect what the board's desire is. If that packet is approved, procedurally, what happens next is there's an application that's prepared that attaches the bylaws, and then that's typically posted on the district's website. Announcements go out to say that the district is seeking members for that committee. And the reason why you attach the bylaws to the application is so that if an interested community member wants to see, okay, well, what does this committee role entail and what am I signing up for, that they have all of that information in hand. Of course, the application asks background questions about the person who's applying, and why they want to serve on the committee is an important question that's included in the application. Those are received, they're vetted, and then, however the district wants to move through that vetting process, and then a recommendation for selection of members, an agenda item selecting the members is brought to the board for consideration and approval. And then as soon as that occurs, the meetings can be initiated and begin.
May I ask a follow-up question to Member Antigana's question? I want to make sure that you weren't asking about how long does the committee have to be formed, because I think even the board can give direction about how long. Like they may say, you must have a recommendation back to us by a certain time, right? So it doesn't go on forever. Like you can give us some parameters that we'd like to have a report in 3 months, and then we would have to make that work happen in that time frame. Otherwise, I think you have the risk where a committee can just take it out to a certain time point. But I would think that you would want to have either certain reports coming back into you for check-ins, with the idea that this work would be completed in either 4 meetings, 3 meetings, whatever it might be. I mean, you guys can determine that, of course, as the board. But I don't know if you want it to be open endless, where it could just go. It can go on and on and on. I mean, quite frankly, it can go really long, depending on the kind of input that you're out there getting. And I think you need to have some parameters. That would be helpful. Am I correct in understanding that, or do we not have that as an option?
Typically, it's you give the committee some flexibility around the length of time and the number of meetings, but I think that it's important to share with the committee that there's a goal of reaching maybe a recommendation or an end result within a certain amount of time if it's going to inform the next step in the process. So I think it can be framed that way.
Okay.
Because yes, there is the danger that maybe there isn't necessarily always a very good understanding of what's under the committee's purview, and the discussions can continue to go on if there isn't an end point and goal in mind.
So I think it's a really bad idea to be like forming multiple committees, and here's why. And Member Thomas kind of raised the example and talked about the school consolidation committee. And for those of of you that remember, and I was just joining the board as this was ending, so the board created a specific school consolidation committee, and I don't know whether it was a Brown Act committee or not, but it was a disaster, and it got lots of people in the community very upset. And when we talk about like involving lots of people, it did involve lots of people. I think there were over 12 members on that committee. But also, because, and I suspect maybe it wasn't actually a formal Brown Act committee, I'm not sure, but I'm just going to be frank, there were certain board members that had their thumb on the scale, and even when the committee was trying to advocate for one particular issue, it was being brought back and it was being managed. And for those that remember, right, there was a lot of rancor in our community and unhappiness at the decisions that were made, because the decisions actually weren't, what the conclusions didn't match the facts. And so I think that we really, we're saying that we know that we can use one committee as the vehicle, right? And that the committee can go through multiple stages. And quite frankly, I mean, I think that if you have 11 people on a committee, that's almost borderline like difficult to manage. And so you want to, but again, okay, maybe 11's the limit or whatever, but I don't think that this is going to preclude us from having the board commission that to say, well, we need to have somebody go out and study this and bring back a report, or an opportunity for, if we want to have school, specific school input, that they have an opportunity to come in and provide input. And the reason why I think that this is so important, and even though I personally can get frustrated with the Brown Act, but I also understand the intent. And for those that that maybe don't kind of know the history, for many years in politics, there were it was sort of the rumor that decisions were made in the smoke-filled room, right? So it's this back room, and so there's sort of the public perception of things that are going on, but really there's a couple power brokers in the smoke-filled room that are calling all the shots, right? And so that's why the Brown Act ultimately came into being, is to say, no, we want to have full transparency around what's going on. And so I think that this is, whatever we do, it really needs to be a Brown Act committee, and it really needs to be able to have, for the community, not only to be able to watch, but to be able to come in and provide suggestions to us. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I agree that it ought to be a Brown Act committee, and I had an idea that I was curious if it would be feasible that might address one of the things that Superintendent Vacar had brought up regarding like representation of each of the school sites. Would it be possible to add a stipulation to the 7-Eleven committee bylaws that says that, like, among those 11 people, there must be at least one person with an affiliation to each of our school sites comprising that committee? So, we have a teacher, administrator, parent, landowner, business community, maybe they have a grandkid or something, so that theoretically we could have representation from our 9 school sites on the 7-Eleven committee. It might be a little hard to achieve, but could that be something we add into a bylaw so we have at least one voice who is like personally connected to each school site to ensure that they have a voice on the committee? Is that something that would be feasible?
Yes, you can add that. I mean, it makes it a little more difficult to find members
Yeah,
and
certainly.
be able to, but there are different ways that concept can be achieved. So maybe working hand in hand with the district team, we can think through how best to incorporate that requirement into the bylaws so that you do have representation from the schools.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be really ideal in that everybody could feel like they can look at one person on that 7-Eleven committee and say, that person is affiliated with my school, and I know that our interests are being taken into account as a potential kind of way to ensure that a small committee is fully representative of the
Yeah,
community.
I can't speak to the process that happened here prior, but what I have heard since I've been here is that there was a feeling that there wasn't enough fairness or equity in whoever the committee was, and that it was a little bit heavily influenced in a certain direction. So I've heard that too. The reason I bring it up is that I know that in talking and listening, well, not even talking, listening to our community, especially as we went through the bond process, they really just, I think they recognize that there's probably going to be a need to do something, They all wonder what's going to happen next. I mean, there's concerns because obviously we're getting smaller. People know that. And so I think to be able to give enough parameters to this committee as to what their charge is going to be very, very important. So it's really clear and that we're being transparent about what is the committee charged to do. And then two, who is the makeup of that committee that does that work. Doesn't mean that you don't get reports back from staff or they don't ask staff for a particular report that might, either have something surveyed, I don't know what it might be, but whatever it is, I think staff is here to help and support so that there is good quality information coming back so that decisions can be made. And again, I don't have a feeling one way or the other as to whether or not it's 1, 2 committees. I don't really have a concern with that. What I do want to make sure is that there's parameters, that there's enough tangible stuff that staff can help keep it moving, and it just doesn't end up being what I kind of heard before, maybe a little bit drawn out, a little bit maybe one-sided, that we're able to really help and support the community with information. And what I really like about this particular meeting, which was different than our last meeting, is that it is being televised. We're trying to get information out, which was the reason for bringing this particular meeting back. The other documents on here, as you can see, they weren't updated. They are old documents. And so I just want to make sure that I'm really being transparent with you. We are not moving forward with any more additional things, but we're looking for additional information and direction so that we can help you move forward and actually come up with the right documents to be able to help you do that.
Member Thomas.
Let me say again, how do you pronounce your name?
Abrahamian or
Abra-
Abrahamian, however you-
Brahamian, okay.
whatever's easier.
Do you have examples of when a 7-Eleven committee has worked on school consolidation, school closure, as part of their charge, and how does that reflected in their bylaws? And if we did decide to try to make it one committee that does that, what are there sample bylaws or recommendations that you would make that on who constitutes committee to make sure that we get public input, we get input from the city perhaps, that we get community input, not just parent input? I think it should be broad input when we're talking about possibly exchanging properties that may be interesting to other people other than the educational community. So expanding it beyond just educational community.
I will say that my recommendation is typically not to have a consolidation and 7-Eleven committee as one committee. And the reason why is because what we find is that it's difficult for the 7-Eleven committee, if we're thinking about what a 7-Eleven committee's primary role is to make recommendations to the board about potential disposition options for real property. It's often difficult for them to have both the consolidation purview and then the what happens next. So oftentimes there will be, typically how this has been working, and I think generally working well, is there will be either a separate Brown Act committee around consolidation or an ad hoc committee around consolidation. And then, and that goes hand in hand with some of the consolidation processes we reviewed in the slides. And then to look at the next step, which is phase 2 of what happens next, the 7-Eleven committee takes on that role. The baton is passed to them and they continue with that work. So in terms of examples, yeah, there are examples out there, but that's not typically the recommendation from me or the firm. So, but it can be structured that way, yes.
Member Hill.
So again, just to kind of emphasize, and maybe you're using the term consolidation as sort of a generic term, right? But we're not talking about consolidation, right? And so, and I think the thing that's important to stress is that at least I'm talking about, and would be interested to see how fellow board members view this, but I'm talking about that you start out at 30,000 feet. Okay, you start out with a global view. You look at everything, right? And then we come back with some findings. That committee comes back with some findings, and they're going to report to the board what those findings are. And in that initial phase, the board is also going to give them some parameters, right? So we're going to say, you're going to do this global view, but here's a couple of the lenses that we want you to apply as you're doing this global view, and we want you to come back with a report. So then they come back with the report, right? And then I would say that we then take a second step, which is, okay, now that we've seen this, now we have a better sense of some more tactical things that we want to do with the 7-Eleven committee. But then I would recommend that we have the same members, and the reason why is, like, I've been in situations where something was started under somebody else, and then all of a sudden I come in, and it's like, well, why did they do that, and why did it? And so they don't always have skin in the game, right? Whereas if you have people that have gone through this process, and they understand ultimately that they report to the board, and they provide recommendations, and then we give them ultimately guidance for the next steps, I think that there's further buy-in. Also, you're not going to have the situation of a brand new committee coming in and trying to figure out what's going on. They know what the game plan is, and now they're ready to take it to the next level, right? So, I mean, that's my suggestion.
I like Member Hill. Could you please expand a little bit more on this global look and what it might look like? Because, we have declining enrollment. Many of our schools are not operating efficiently, and they're not projected to operate efficiently in the future. So there would be additional things that potential uses for our facilities that would include consolidation, frankly. How would you bound or create a bound on this global view of the committee that you said would be the same people as on a 7-Eleven committee?
Well, so my thought on this, right, is that before you start moving the puzzle pieces, you need to understand what the puzzle pieces are and what function they serve, right? And so I don't even think that, I'm sure that many in the community don't know all the details around that. And I would say that even members of the board, and I would put myself first, don't know what happens at each of these sites, right? And so what I would like to be able to say is, okay, here's all of the sites. Here's how big they are. Here's like an assessment of what the value is. Here's what they do. And then once you've got that, then you may discover, let's take McGregor as an example. McGregor is a massive piece of land. And we may look at that and say, you know what, there's certain things that are happening there that really need to stay there, and there's no other way that we can do it. Or maybe we say, maybe this is, an area that provides the biggest option for some of the things that we're wanting to do. And I think it may then end up reprioritizing things, because we may find, because I think that the thought initially is that we've got these parcels that are not being used right now, and that this is the initial priority. But what I would say is that maybe there's a higher and better use for some of the other things, and that really should be the priority, right? And so rather than going in and diving just with what's currently potentially available, maybe we rethink some things. But I don't think we'll know that unless we look at the whole picture. Am I answering your question?
Yes and no, because I'm trying to imagine, say, take McGregor, for example. We have about 80 students there, and we have the adult school, and we have students coming in and out for the, what's the other school?
For Crossroads?
Crossroads, yeah. But that is wholly underutilized. Well, part of this look at it would have to look at how do you fully utilize it or surplus it. So those are, then if you surplus it, you're kind of getting into the realm of consolidating, moving those 70 or 80 or 100 Bridgepoint students to another site. And so you really get into a big jigsaw puzzle of changes that I think really belong in the realm of staff to do the research and talk and bring possibilities. And I don't know if they bring it to the committee or they bring it to the board. I'd like to have staff be the entity that comes to us with the full range of possibilities and potential suggestions that maybe the board needs to look at. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what I'm feeling right now.
Well, I mean, my sense is that again, that everybody has an opportunity to participate in this discussion. And so it's not, so whoever's on the committee, okay, so they're running the meetings and they're having the discussions, but there's multiple people, and I would expect that multiple people would be providing input, and I would be expecting the committee members to ask for that. And I think that we as the board, I mean, part of this issue is that we need to give this committee at all points a charter, right? So what I mean by a charter is that there's specific objectives, right? And so for example, right, and I think, well, the charter could simply be as simple as, we're tired of these parcels being vacant and we just want to get rid of them. I mean, that could be a charter element. I don't agree with that, but it could be a charter element, right? But what I would say is that a different charter element could be, one of the strategic objectives that we want to accomplish in our district is that we want to be able to provide health care for our people. Okay, and so how can we pay for that? And so then part of the analysis will be, well, okay, what do we kind of think in terms of the costs of doing that? And then what are the different parcels or properties that, like how much are they worth? Are there certain things that could be moved, could not be moved? So that would be an example where we, the board, give a charter. I think another potential issue that we could put out as a charter is, what was the other one I was thinking about?
Can I share with you maybe a couple ideas? I think that,
Sure.
like there was like,
Please.
Member Block has wanted to speak.
oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, all right. I just want to give you the, okay.
All right. I think the word, I think there's a couple different words. I think there's the word consolidation, there's the word optimization. When you look at the big global element and you're trying to funnel it down, right, and you're trying to really bring it together, I think you do need to talk about some of those other big elephants in the room that we haven't been able to solve educationally. And I think healthcare is one piece. We all know that's a problem for us to attract and retain staff. We've also talked about staff housing as being a very important one. And not recognizing it's very expensive to live here in the Bay Area. And staff that's in the educational world doesn't make as much as some of the private sector people that are out there, or some of these large companies or startup companies that are, able to fund a much higher salary to be able to live here in this area. But yet we need to have the educational services and we want to make sure that we can support them. Maybe it's things around, academic goals that we might want to be able to set to make sure that we hit those achievement blocks that are, high up on your goal levels that we've talked about. So in listening to what you all have been sharing with me and with the community and thinking about that, I think it's more of an optimization element that we really need to be able to bring in and really identify what are those, and maybe the board starts off, hey, we want to be able to solve these couple of things. What does that look like? And those parameters would help myself as staff to be able to communicate with whoever the committee is that you bring on board. I would tell you be more transparent than less. I always think that's better. Having served on a board myself for 30 years, I can tell you the more people that have input, the easier it becomes because at least their voice gets heard, right? And then we had to sit there and listen to what they have to say and then determine, how does that outweigh within the bigger picture of things? And of course, that's the work of that committee to kind of help hone that in for recommendations ultimately to all of you. I don't know if I captured some of that, but I think I know where you're going to with it. And I don't disagree that I think it needs to probably be a Brown Act committee. For this community in particular, I think it's a good thing for us to be able to get information out so that it's solid.
And the staff, the staffing, so housing, right? That was the thing I was forgetting about. And that would be a classic example where, unless you know all the properties, and also there may be zoning issues, a variety of different things, like we may not be able to actually achieve that objective until we understand all the pieces of the puzzle.
I did want to make the point too that what we've been seeing more of lately is, let's say you have a 7-Eleven or other type of Brown Act committee, on a parallel track, there is the opportunity to have community meetings that inform that process. So to not just think, I mean, this is just a more general comment for all of us, to not just think as the meetings as the only place where that input can be gathered,
Right.
but also on a parallel track, the community meetings can occur and that can inform the process. So I did want to just make that point and put that out there.
Member Block.
Thank you, President Jones. Just a couple of things. I've really appreciated just listening to this whole conversation. I do think like we should use the word optimization rather than consolidation in this discussion. I think that calms everybody's nerves in the community, among district staff. Yes, enrollment is declining, but there has been no determination that consolidation is necessary. And for all we know, the enrollment decline may be bottoming out, and we may start to see a rebound in the next few years. And so I think it's very premature to use the word consolidation, and I would rather we use that term optimization that's been thrown around that feels like one that I think will make everybody feel comfortable and not create any misconceptions around what's being discussed. I understand the idea of having a broad purview. Just one factor that hasn't been brought up, though, that does make me think a little bit more about the currently vacant properties as a bit of a priority is the fact that we're paying a lot to maintain completely unused facilities, right? I know Superintendent Vickers talked about the cost of just providing the security for snow alone is costing the district greatly right now, and that's money that's being spent that doesn't benefit any student's education, and that money could be going towards educational outcomes. And so in my mind, the vacant properties are the priority, although I understand the idea of wanting to have a broader scope to ensure we're being strategic. If we're trying to find a charter or some sort of parameters for a committee with broader scope, I mean, maybe just some ideas that I was thinking of is maybe the charter is this committee should have an emphasis on maximizing facility use to retain high quality staff. So that could involve employee housing, that could involve leasing a property in order to fund healthcare for our employees. We could also have it be part of the mission to reduce the facilities drain on the budget for properties that are not actually being used for educational outcomes. And then the third plank of the charter being something along the line of making sure that the facilities provided for our kids are, new, modern, 21st century, and that could be like a relatively general statement of principles that guides their exploration.
I would agree with what you're saying, and I also like the word optimizing, because through that optimization, we may decide that there's an extra there is a piece of property that does wind up being surplus, but it just feels more transparent, for one, because we are trying to optimize what we have. How do we use it to best serve the everyone's needs, from the standpoint of not having too much staff per student ratios, and getting some creativity in what might be some possible ways to optimize our properties. But I definitely am in agreement with Member Block over the amount of money that snow in particular is costing us, and I feel like that piece of property needs to be one of the first things that's really dealt with, to see if we can eliminate that. I mean, I know it's well over $200,000 a year that we're putting into just that one piece of property. That's a lot of money away from students.
It may be a lot of money. I actually gave some thought to this, I think, from our last discussion that we had about that property just kind of being a nuisance. Besides being a nuisance for us, I know it's a nuisance for the neighborhood and the community, but that might be like an ideal piece of property because it's in a neighborhood for us to be able to do something with staff housing. So I think that to me is something that's on the table, because it's in the perfect spot to be in a community to bring our people into a community to be able to do some of that. I know with us here this evening, I just want to, give a shout out to the city. We have some city staff members that are here. They're kind of just shadowing. They've been great thought partners, and I just really want to thank them for being here this evening and helping to be just another asset to be able to help us as we continue to move forward. So thanks for being here this evening. I appreciate it very much. But yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, is it a problem? It is. I mean, I can tell you about, some of the horror stories that we've had in the last 10 days on some of those properties, but, we're working through it. We're trying to deal with it. It is expensive to sit there and try to just even do just like a basic maintenance with it. But I also can tell you that it sits in a place that could be a great place to be able to bring teacher housing into and staff housing.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, from my standpoint, and I know I'm butting into a couple of other people, but when I think of it as a surplus property, it's how do we get creative with it? It's not necessarily that we're just going to sell it off, but how do we work with that piece of property? Because it's so wonderfully located in a residential area. There's a park right there. It would lend itself really well for that. And with that, Member Hill.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and again, I think that we're saying much of the same thing. So, you start with the optimization and you look at all the pieces, but also don't necessarily forecast or predict what the outcome is going to be, right? I mean, you want to do a study and
sure.
see, and we may find out that maybe some of the surplus properties that are truly not being used right now, that maybe those are the ones that need to be addressed first, or we may find a surprise too, that maybe there's something else, and sometimes, what would also be helpful, I think, in that analysis is, how much are we paying for these various properties on a yearly basis, because we may find sometimes that maybe it might be still worth paying a little bit more if we find another better opportunity, right? So I think we just want to have a fully informed decision.
Agreed. Member Thomas.
Well, I agree with the fact that, that might be an ideal place for workforce housing. But if we also look at Sam Scott Field for workforce housing, these buildings could be 3 and 4 stories high because they're bounded up by Newark Boulevard. But that's the kind of thing a study of those opportunities can bring out. Which parcels do we know right now we could start looking at for workforce housing?
Exciting.
Member Aguano.
One last thing, and just I appreciate you guys, your feedback from everyone that's here tonight. Have we ever thought into considering a joint use, local government, facilities, nonprofits that we go ahead and, bring in for these particular organizations that, we could share space with them? I know at Music, we've had several, local governments come and do drills, right? I mean, we could definitely start renting or have some type of nonprofit come in or local government.
I would say right now with the current condition of the 2 properties, it would not be conducive to bring them back to life right now with their current condition. I'm having done the walking assessments of them. Just to share that with you, I would not recommend that that's what you do with those particular 2 pieces of property at this point, and I'd be happy to provide you with additional information.
And that's where Member Hill comes in, right? He mentioned all sites to be assessed.
Yeah.
The assessment of all the sites, how much money are we losing per site, and really just look into and dive into it and prioritize. We need to start focusing yesterday for tomorrow.
Yeah.
Member Hill.
And one thing, just to build on Member Anguiano's point, that could be a part of our charter, right? And so we could say, so for example, and I'm just spitballing, but we could just say that maybe the charter initially is that we're going to do an optimization study, and that looks at all properties. But the things that we want to optimize on are potentially how do we pay for health care? Number 2, how do we potentially provide employee housing? And then number 3, maybe it could be that maybe we want to bring in a nonprofit to provide intervention support, for example, right? So maybe we, I mean, since we know that there are kids that need extra help, maybe we identify a facility that where we can consolidate those efforts. And again, I'm not saying that that's the right answer, but I'm just kind of building on your point that there may be some other resources or things that we think we want to have or other objectives that we have as a district that maybe property could serve those objectives.
Can I, from this, let me just see if I can maybe kind of help pull this kind of back together again. So I think what I'm hearing is that you want to run a committee around optimization, right? That same committee may also go into the 7-Eleven phase. I'm going to call it phase 2 for now. Phase 1 for sure, though, is to go off and do the optimization underneath the Brown Act guys. Probably keep the number to a number that is reasonable to be able to manage, right? But also then be able to give broader input from the rest of the community with that community shifting out so that they are getting a broad perspective of information. There was a conversation about maybe making sure that each school had representation, something I heard, right? It was like, we had to go back and create the bylaws and stuff that go along with this, right? Am I correct?
Yes.
Yeah, and are you, I don't know if you're taking notes or not, I've been sitting here.
I've been
Me
taking
too.
a lot of notes.
Me too. So I just want to make sure that we're capturing everything so that we can bring back a document for your consideration for the future. Am I missing something in that? Because I think what that includes property assessments. What I heard a couple things were looking at how do we retain and attract high quality staff, looking at perhaps staff housing, looking at the idea of how we could maybe use our properties to help us bring in things that we can't afford right now, such as healthcare and benefits, right? That would help and support. And then we also looked at facilities that create that 21st century learning. We heard a lot about that during the time that we went out for the bond. Yeah. We heard community members talk to us that they want more STEAM learning. They want more AI opportunities for their kids. They want them to be able to work with robotics and engineering and have those additional opportunities, as well as the environmental elements, because we're right here on the Bay. So I heard a lot about that went along with it. And then I think talking about also some of the intervention support systems that would really help students achieve academically, which is really tied to your educational goals that you have. Did I miss anything in there that you'd want to add that would be helpful for us?
I'm pretty satisfied with how you summed that up.
And I think that you captured it, but I think that maybe we also could just think, again, if there are any other potential objectives that we could think individually about it and then provide that feedback back to get it on the list, and then maybe we agree to everything, or maybe we say, well, okay, we like these 5 or whatever it is.
So I think this is where I'll lean back into our ad hoc team here at the board, so that as we kind of work on the draft of this, we can go back to you for some input. If I hear from other board members, I'll bring that back to you, so I can have that part of the conversation. But I really do want to try to get this thing moving in the right direction to be able to set the right tone and to be able to start these important discussions, I think, here in our community.
I remember Hill, sorry.
Sorry. So, but just one question, Superintendent Vacar. So the only concern I have, because it is very strategic, what we're doing is important, but we have a lot of stuff on our plate, right? And so I'm just concerned that we have the bandwidth to start this right now. And especially, so not only do we have a lot of things on our plate, but also we have some resource constraints too. So, I'd be just curious what people's thoughts are on that.
Anyone?
Well, I think the superintendent
Go ahead.
I think the superintendent is the one that the resources are really impacting you, so it would kind of be up to you to say, do you have the resources right now to go to the next step?
If I don't have the resources, I think it's important for me to come back and talk to the board about that, right? So if I need to have a facilitator or a consultant that's helping us along the way to be able to do that work, I think this is the opportune time for me to be able to bring that information back to you. Now that I have a better understanding, I think, of where you want to be able to take this, I do have some ideas and some thoughts. I appreciate you asking. We have a small but mighty staff. It's getting stronger each and every day, thankfully. And, but there are other competing priorities that are sitting out there. So in thinking about that, I may want to think about a facilitator that would be able to help keep us on track, keep it going, and keep things in motion and play. There may be a need to be able to bring in some other people. For instance, if you're doing property valuation on, properties, I need to have an expert in that. That's not myself or my team.
Right.
I'll have to go out and go get the experts for that, right? If we're looking at, having to map out the size of our facilities, because quite frankly, some of our plans and our plots are pretty old, I may need some assistance with that, right? So I think that, again, those are pieces that we can get people to help us, and that doesn't have to be taxed on myself or on my team at this point. But I think I need to make sure that I'm communicating with you, this is going towards this resource to help. And so what I think I'd like to do is maybe identify a budget appropriate to be able to help and support this work, to go along with it, so that we have the right resources to be able to build upon and be able to have the level of expertise that helps to keep the committee moving. So I would like to take just a little bit of time to kind of like think about that a little bit, and maybe also ask a couple other superintendents from some smaller school districts that have recently gone through something similar, for their thoughts on it as well.
Member Aguiano.
With respect of that, you mentioned the evaluating of property. So that would be a real estate broker. Would that be someone from a local, or would it be outside that we'll be focusing
Yeah.
individuals to come in?
I think
or-
it's probably a piece, again, would probably go back to our board committee to have a discussion with. I mean, it could be an RFP that we go, or request for proposal, or a request for application. I mean, it could be a couple of different ways that we go about doing it. It could be what? Okay. So one of the things that was suggested by our legal team is that it could actually be under OHH, where they actually bring it underneath them, and then it kind of gets, so we'd had to sit there and kind of like determine that. That way you've got protected privileges in some cases, if that's the case, I would think. And I don't know quite how all that works, but I think we can learn from each other. And I think I just would need to kind of map it out a little bit. And I think that would probably be some of my next steps from this conversation, is to sit here and map it out, and make sure I'm not missing something, and then to be able to do a check-in with our ad hoc team that we have. And that goes, I think, both for the bylaws that we'd be looking at, as well as some of the directional elements that we want to make sure that we capture from this conversation. And of course, that then comes back eventually to all of you to make a final decision. But I think we can probably, bring that back to you and give you some ideas to what we would estimate some costs and stuff that would be along with that. So I would think I would probably need like another 30 days to go back and be able to do that, but be able to keep that thing moving and bring it back to you here in a timely manner, hopefully by the end of October.
Did you have a follow-up question? Because you're back on here. Okay. Member Block.
Thanks. So what, just what would be like your estimate in terms of like the overall timeline of this process? And then like, how would that interact also with like the CBO search ongoing, who like, we probably want the CBO to also be whoever this new person is, who hopefully we find soon, to also be like weighing into that conversation. Like, what do you foresee as the timeline?
Great question. Well, of course, I think when we started this quest, a few months back, we thought that we would already have a CBO, I think, here in place, and we don't. Currently, our CBO search, we are probably hoping, best scenario is to be able to bring a recommendation back to the board the last board meeting in October, but maybe pushed back to the beginning part of November. So I think it still somewhat aligns, even if we go off and launch and get some of the preliminary work done with, what are the bylaws, what is the mission that's being done, right? You still need to go out for committee applications. So I think it will still intersect where a CBO will be able to sit there and weigh in on, or maybe it's something that the superintendent takes on. So I mean, it may be a combination of one or both things. I think that's up to all of you to decide as somebody else is stepping into it. It's a lot to be able to step right into. Obviously, if I'm involved, there's a timeline for me, because you guys will also be starting your superintendent search as we, move towards the end of June. So, in thinking about that, I would think that both both the CBO and the superintendent would be actively involved, but maybe some lead certain works over the other. Good question.
All right, any other questions, thoughts? Do we go to adjournment? Are we at the point where do you feel like you have enough information to be able to move forward with?
Yeah, I feel like we've captured a lot of what you have talked about. This is really what we needed, I think, as both staff and
Okay.
as your legal team to be able to help bring all this together. So we're really grateful for this conversation. And we most certainly didn't mean to create any additional inks out there. We just wanted to make sure that we included, past history of where we were so that we could actually continue to move forward. So I hope that helps.
Great, well, thank you.
Thank
All
you
right.
very much for all of the information that you provided and the feedback.
Okay. Rachel, can I borrow your gavel? No, I'm just kidding. Meeting is adjourned at 6:54. Thank you, thank you.
Good.
Oop.